Audio check.
Teams audio check. Okay, good morning, everybody. Before we move on to our business for this morning, just a couple of housekeeping and related notes. First of all, the 106 obligation or obligations or whatever it may be, hopefully this evening for a bit of bedtime reading for us. It sends you to sleep, if nothing else. Do we know if that's likely?
I know there's a meeting happening right now from the council side,
Okay.
sorting out a response to the UU that we got yesterday.
Yeah.
And so I think we were asked for comments by 10 a.m., but that certainly hasn't been possible given the time we've had
Okay.
to look at that. But we will be getting a response as soon as we can.
Okay. It's obviously very actively being pursued. I'm good with that.
It is indeed. Mr. Henderson and I were up till midnight doing it ourselves last night.
Personally, I was up till 1 o'clock watching the storm, which was much more exciting. Right, couple of, obviously today we're concluding the cross-examination of Mr. Melling, then some re-examination, and then we're switching across to the planning balance evidence, and at some time around 4 o'clock we'll be hearing a little bit more cross-examination from Mr. Renshaw when he virtually arrives. Just picking up on two matters related to today. I have seen a couple of documents from XR elders, the second of which is a plan which, as you said in the email, I'm sure that plan has come in, but you said you just wanted to identify it, which is fine. Now, Mr. Melling, I'm sure, will be familiar with the plan in its original form, wherever it is. I don't have any problem with that at all. The other document that you sent through, well, I saw it last night. You said this was a matter that you wanted to deal with today, presumably in cross-examination. It was the Transport Statistics Great Britain 2019. I mean, you heard me getting very boring yesterday and talking about the relevance to Greenbelt, and obviously I'm sure that there is something in there that you want to raise relevant to Greenbelt. But the problem is, and I'm looking here particularly at Mr. Humphreys, that this document came in to all the parties sometime late yesterday. I doubt it has gone to Mr. Melling.
As far as I know, it hasn't. I didn't think that I should send it on to him because he's in Purda. I just checked a moment ago. It's not on the website, so he won't have seen it through that. I did look through the document last night, and you know, obviously I'm not sure what its relevance is to Greenbelt, but Mr. Melling, unless for some reason someone else has pinged it onto him, but I didn't think I should.
No, well, that was why I raised it. Mr. Melling, have you seen this document that we're talking about, Transport Stats 2019?
I haven't seen it. It doesn't mean it's not somewhere in my inbox, but I'm afraid I haven't seen it.
That's absolutely fine.
Shall I add a bit of clarification?
Sure.
I mentioned this when I was presenting my evidence. Basically, I'm referring to the fact that in those statistics, they classify taxis as public transport, so Department for Transport. So the reason for me sending it was I could just refer to it again, but I thought people ought to have the actual source. So it's a glancing reference to the document.
Sorry, a glancing reference back to your evidence. I do remember that evidence.
Yes, yeah,
so
because I mentioned that the Department for Transport categorised taxis as public transport,
Yep.
but I realised that I hadn't actually given you the document that shows that.
I do remember you saying that, but just to be clear, is this something for Mr. Melling or not? Or is this something...
Yes, because I will be referring
Yeah.
to, again, the fact that they are, but it's a glancing...
It's the source document for what you've already said.
Exactly, yeah. I'm not going through the transport statistics in detail.
No, please don't.
No. It wasn't about that. And in fact, I sort of went to send it and I saw it was 12 megabytes. I thought, blimey. I've actually just got a sort of the page as well, if you'd rather have that as a document.
I don't have a problem with that. Mr. Humphreys.
No, I'm not sure that it's, in a sense, necessary sort of put the document, if the point is that they've categorised it as public transport, then, you know, so be it, the document can go in at some other point. I'm not sure, you know, I'm not sure in a sense, if the point is, look, people don't own taxis and therefore it's public transport, well, people don't own aircraft either unless they happen to be oligarchs, and yet you don't usually characterise those as public transport. I suppose they are in one sense, but I think I'm happy for the questions to be put, and I'm happy for the document to go in.
Yeah, I'm quite content with that. I was just absolutely fine. We'll have the document in. I remember now the reference, obviously, in your own evidence. I was only concerned that because Mr. Melling and Mr. Humphreys couldn't communicate, and he hasn't seen the document, I think we can deal with it quite briefly. I don't have a problem with that at all. When I first saw it, I just thought, that's a very large document, and okay, now that's absolutely fine. The other matter that I wanted to raise, bear with me a second. Yesterday we had a note in from the council on outstanding transport information.
Yes, sir.
Which we saw yesterday, but frankly didn't get the chance to look at it in particular detail, if at all. I've also seen now the response or the comment from the appellant, suggesting it might be misleading as it's drafted, but also saying that BAL could then consider and provide a response in due course. I mean, it has to be said that when, excuse me, it was Mr. Young in particular who asked for this document, and we're 95% sure we asked for an agreed document. And of course, this document that's come in isn't agreed. It clearly isn't agreed, and we've heard since that it's not agreed.
Yes.
So, I mean, I think what I'm proposing to do with that document is simply put it to one side for the moment, invite, as they've volunteered, the appellants to consider it and respond in whatever way is most useful. So I think we'll deal with it that way. You okay with that? Yeah. Okay.
So not on that, just, and thank you for that. Just going back to Caa Elders, you mentioned also a document that was a plan, and I may have missed the email. Is that a document that's on the now on the website?
It is.
If it is, then I'll have it, because I download them all every night. If it's something that's in an email, I may not have.
It came in.
Shall I provide clarity on that one too?
Yeah, please.
Because this is something, it came to my email box actually at the end of August, and I believe it was from BAL. And they sent through 3 plans showing parking layouts. Well, one was for 12 MPPA, one was for 10 MPPA, and one was the current situation. So I just kind of saved them, but then when I was looking for the CD reference last night, I couldn't find it. But I mean, it's not something it's not one of my concoctions.
No.
It's a bona fide plan.
No, I'm not suggesting at all that Ms. Beth has done something, and I just wanted to make sure that I knew what document, and so that I can access it, and so that Mr. Melling can access it. Just wasn't sure
the
what it
answer
was.
on that point is that you can't at the moment in the way that it's come in, because it came in this morning at 7 minutes past midnight from Ms. Beth.
Yes.
A lot of people have been burning midnight oil.
Slightly sleepless night.
So it came into the programme officer. She was probably up at that time as well. It came into the programme officer overnight, shall we say. It's not gone on to the website as a document yet, but it is just trying to get the plan number so that...
I don't think, but forgive me if I'm wrong, I don't think I was copied in on that.
No, you weren't.
Okay.
It came in from Ms. Beth to the programme officer, who sent it to us
Right. Okay, fine.
to see if we would accept it. I'm just trying to find the plan number. Oh, there it is. It's a plan.
What I don't understand is why it didn't go on the system at the end of August.
It probably is somewhere, to be entirely honest with you. There's an awful lot of documents.
Yeah.
It's a plan headed site-wide parking at 12 mppa, and it is a plan number BRS space PP SK03.
I think it's one of three that was given for site visit. We had a series of
Ah, is that where it
That's
came
it.
from?
Thanks. That's it. You had seen it before somewhere.
12 and the current one.
Yeah, you're right. It's the site visit plan. Mr. Melling, you're nodding, so yeah, that's fine. We know what it is. Right, that's good.
So it's already a core document, is it?
Honest truth is, well, we've certainly had it because it was
Yeah.
one of the documents that we took around on the site visit.
I'm genuinely not sure that it ever became an inquiry document. It might have, and it certainly can become one, but now you've identified it,
Yeah.
I stored it under site visit, so
All right.
I've got it.
Right, sorry. Yeah, we had this very useful bundle produced for the site visit. Let me just... Don't tell me I haven't attached it. No. Worth a try. No, not on that bundle. But yeah, that's where it came from. And I think we'll get that in as a core. I think we'll get the three of those in as core documents, the three plans that we used for the site visit. But that's, yeah, thanks for that. That was certainly the one. Okay. Any other housekeeping matters? No? Nobody on screen? Okay, Ms. Beth, over to you.
Okay. Good morning, Mr. Melling.
Good morning.
So the first issues I want to address, the need for additional parking and increasing public transport modal share. And I'd like to draw your attention to the Caa Stats for 2019. It's CD 7.10 and it's table 7A.
Just have to bear with me while I...
Sure.
Sorry, what did you say the CD reference was?
7.10.
And the table, sorry?
Now, do you know, I've just realised that, in fact, there's 3 tables on that page. So I'm looking at table 7B, in fact. And I just wanted you to confirm, if we look at the top row, private car modal share, at Birmingham Airport 2019, that is 50.3%. Is that correct?
In what year, sorry?
2019.
I have, did you say 50.3?
Yeah.
Yep, 50.3 I have here.
And same table, same modal share car, Manchester 50.9.
Yes, that's correct.
And table 7C gives Bristol's modal share by car, and that is 78.3.
I think it's 68.3.
I do beg your pardon, 68.3, yeah.
Yes.
And you'd agree that this is significantly higher than either Birmingham or Manchester?
Well, I'm not sure if I'd agree it's significant. It's higher.
It's higher by 18 point something percent. Nearly a fifth. Okay.
I mean, I'm not a transport expert, but I know Mr. Witchells did look at this data to compare public transport mode share, because I think there are different ways. I mean, I don't understand. I'm not an expert. There are different ways that the CAA use this data to calculate public transport mode share, and part of that depends on the main mode of transport and things like that. And I know when the comparison exercise that Mr. Witchells completed and is presented in his proof of evidence shows that, I think, from memory, Bristol Airport's public transport mode share in 2019 was similar to Manchester and Birmingham, possibly better. And that's despite the fact that, you know, obviously Manchester benefits
Yes,
from...
I may be able to help you out here. In your proof, paragraph 4.2.33, you do state that BAL has the highest public transport modal share. Now, at this point, I would take issue. In fact, I don't think there's a lot of significant difference. But the point is that your definition of public transport there excludes taxis, which comes to the document we were discussing. Because my question to you is, would it surprise you that the Department for Transport defines a taxi journey as public transport?
It doesn't necessarily surprise me. I mean, I think, you know, that this is probably a question for a transport witness, but what I would say is that, I mean, the DFT can define public transport and where taxis fall in that as they wish. I think my understanding is the CAA define public transport as not including taxis, but again, that's probably a question for Mr. Witchells. I think what's important here is, from our perspective, from the airport's perspective, is that, you know, as agreed with the council, taxis sit at the bottom of the mode share hierarchy, and that's because they generate generate double the amount of trips, which I think this is something that was covered by Mr. Witchells fairly extensively in examination.
Yeah, I'll be coming to that. But in terms of who defines and it's a taxi journey we're talking about as public transport, the vehicle itself, yeah, a private vehicle, but its journeys are defined by the Department of Transport as public transport, and I don't think you need to be a highway expert to agree that the people who are more qualified to determine what that journey is defined as are our own government's Department for Transport rather than the CAA.
This actually is nothing to do with Greenbelt at all.
No, I'm sorry, it very much is.
Well, Mr. Humphreys got in just a second before me. Where are we going on Greenbelt?
Where we're going is that part of the reason for the very high car usage and demand for car parking, and therefore the justification for building in the green belt, is a very low taxi use, and that is partly because Bristol Airport severely penalised taxis.
I'm good with where you're going to Greenbelt, but let's get to Greenbelt as soon as we can. If for no other reason, then I suspect, with all due respect, you're going to get a lot of answers from Mr. Melling, as he's been saying already, that he's not a highways expert.
Yeah. Okay, well, you have mentioned the ASAS and where it places taxis. Mm-hmm. So you feel that the journeys by private car and parking are more sustainable than taxi use?
Yes, and it's not just me. I think the council's own officers, the council's own transport consultants, Mr. Witchells also consider that private car use and car parking at the airport is preferential relative to the use of a taxi, and that comes back to this point which Mr. Witchells, I think, explained quite clearly in his evidence, that taxi use generates more vehicle movements.
Yeah. Would you agree that there's a disabled access issue here, in that the disabled and elderly who can't manage luggage on public transport and may not be able to drive, their taxi is quite often their only option?
I can't comment on that. What I would say is, you know, Bristol Airport aren't saying no taxis. They're just saying, from a sustainable transport hierarchy perspective, they sit at the bottom of the hierarchy.
Okay, well, if I can, how will I do this? The Joint Local Transport Plan, which is CD 7.05, and if you could turn to page 59 here.
Sorry, bear with me just a moment.
Yeah, you have to just bear with me. Is that 59?
Proper 59.
Proper 59.
Yeah.
Sorry, can you carry on bearing with me? I seem to be hitting all the wrong buttons this morning. Sorry, which CD are we on?
We are on Joint Local Transport Plan, CD 7.05.
70.
It is their page 59.
Yes. 59. I'm getting there. Thank you.
And it's PDF 30. And over on the right-hand side of that document, you'll see case study, Mobility as a Service, MAAS.
In the West Midlands, yes.
Yeah, and you're probably aware that one of the public transport improvements BAL are offering is to introduce such a service, or to it, well, no, they're offering to provide some subsidy for a scheme.
I think to explore it, yes.
They're
I
offering
can't
some
remember
money.
Yeah, to undertake at least a feasibility and look into that. I can't remember the exact wording in the current draft section 106.
And you may or may not be aware, but you will see it in that case study, that that includes the use of taxis.
Okay, yeah, I can see that there.
Yeah. Do you not see a conflict here between BAL's promoting that scheme and contributing to it, but also discouraging taxi use at the airport?
I can't comment. I mean, this is mobility as a service in the West Midlands. I don't know how that service would be implemented at the airport. So I'm afraid I can't really comment on that.
Okay, well, just a couple of other questions. So the point is made as part of this scheme, it's about widening access to mobility, that on average a private car is parked up for 96% of its lifetime. So my question is, do you accept that there is a carbon burden from extensive car ownership and building car parking?
I think this is a question for a climate change witness. I'm not sure if I see the relevance to the green belt.
The relevance to the green belt is that because you have very low taxi use and you're discouraging it, you need more car parking, and you have placed in a sustainability hierarchy parking private vehicles above the use of taxis. But there's only one other thing.
Sorry, I would say that, the parking demand study has looked at the demand, and people will drive to the airport whether there's taxis or not. But the intention is to discover. I mean, it's quite clear, as Mr. Witchell's outlined, the intention is to discourage the use of taxis because they're lower down the hierarchy. They emit more emissions because there's double the journeys.
Well, you're confidently expressing that the problem with taxis is an emissions and a carbon problem, so you feel able to comment on that, but I'm putting to you that there is a more complex carbon issue.
It's not just an emissions and carbon problem, but it's also impacts on the highway network as well. But I just don't, I'm sorry, I feel, and I did watch your cross-examination of Mr. Witchell's, and I know you put these questions to him, and I think he answered them. And I think he's probably better qualified than I to answer those questions. And I'm still struggling to see the relationship with the green belt. I think, the parking demand study update has identified a demand for car parking for 4,200 spaces at 12 million passengers per annum. That's been tested by Mr. Witchell's. He's confirmed that it's a tough capacity target, and I accept that evidence.
Yeah, the difference among various parties at this inquiry is about that parking estimate that you refer to is based on a pretty high level of car ownership, and the debate is about whether public transport, which I would say could include taxis to an extent, I'm not saying they should not be quite so discouraged. And actually my last question on this is, we spoke yesterday, and I think you raised it, about the problems locally with taxis parking up.
Yes, that's right.
Now, BAL could do something about that, couldn't they? And I believe they have. Are taxis not allowed now to park in the south zone?
I think BAL have tried to offer a solution to that by providing a free taxi waiting area in the south side to help ameliorate that issue. So I think, you know, I take from that the airport's listening to the concerns of the local residents and taking measures to address those, but I don't see how that is, you know, that specific point is relevant here and relevant to the Greenbelt.
Yeah, we raised it. It was raised yesterday. Okay, I'll move on to a justification for low-cost parking in the Greenbelt, which is your first very special circumstance. Now, if I can refer you to your proof, paragraph 5.4.17. Now, you talk here about BAL's, it's about the, so you have to bear with me, I say paper by putting 2 pages on one sheet and then can hardly read them. Right. Towards the second from last sentence, actually, you talk about the unique position of BAL to promote sustainable surface access and that this would be undermined. Now, sustainable surface access, do you mean public transport there? And I'm happy to go with your definition of public transport at the moment.
I think it's a range of measures, isn't it? It's public transport. It's, I mean, for staff, for example, it's car sharing, those sort of measures as well. So, but I think in this context, and when we're looking at some of the appeal decisions relating to off-site car parks, what the inspectors are, I think, referring to is the significant investment that the airport makes into public transport.
Yeah, okay. So it wouldn't include private cars driving and being parked in the airport. A sustainable surface access is not private cars parking.
Well, I think there's a balance to be struck, isn't there? You know, you have to provide sufficient car parking on site to address some of the issues that we've heard about. But you also, you know, as the airport are doing, is invest in public transport.
Yes, and they're investing in public transport because that's sustainable surface access and they've agreed to promote it.
Yes, yeah. The airport takes its responsibilities
and
very seriously in terms of
promotion proposed of public transport is not to do with car parking, it is to help slightly reduce car parking.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
And that reflects, you know, I mentioned earlier I think Mr. Witchell's had a figure which showed the hierarchy, which is supported by the airport, and, you know, obviously public transport is higher than car parking sorry, trips by private car in that hierarchy.
Okay, and so one of your problems with off-site car parking, and presumably we're talking unauthorised off-site parking, is that it undermines the use of public transport.
Yes, well, it undermines the ability of the airport to meet its ASAS objectives, and that's been recognised in the enforcement cases that I've referenced in my evidence, because those operators don't make a contribution to the airport's ASAS like the airport does.
And they provide cheap parking, which is more attractive than getting on a bus for people.
Well, BAL doesn't have the ability to control those prices, obviously. So yes, they are able to provide car parking at a low cost, which could one of the things that could happen is it could promote further use of the car. So
your argument for providing lower cost car parking at the Silver Zone extension is that then you will be able to compete with off-site car parking.
I think there's an identified need to provide 4,200 spaces. If the airport doesn't provide those spaces on site, then one of the potential outcomes of that is that it's met off-site. Another potential outcome is it increases drop-off and pick-up. So again, come back to the point around double the vehicle movements.
Yes, your justification for providing parking in the green belt rather than a multi-storey car park, for example, is that it is cheaper, that this is what people want, and that only that way can you compete with the off-site car parking.
There's a demand, yes, there's a demand for lower cost parking. That's been clearly set out in the parking demand study, and I think Mr. Witchell's explained this in his evidence as well. And I discussed it yesterday. There is a demand for lower cost parking. I consider it's correct that demand should be met on site.
Okay, we were introduced to the legal opinion, your rebuttal proof Annex B yesterday. It was discussed, and I think, as I took it, the local planning authority cannot compel a certain price structure on BAL's parking provision.
I think my understanding is that is a risk. There is a competition law risk. I mean, as I said yesterday, I'm not a lawyer, but that is the advice that the airport's received, and that's what's presented.
Yes, that's what I read there as well. So then, presumably, it would be right to say that the local planning authority can't restrict parking charges at the Silver Zone to a lower level either.
I don't think they could. No, but again, I'm not a lawyer, I'm afraid.
Okay, I'd like to draw your attention to INQ 60, which is screen grabs for parking charges at the airport. Have you got it?
So you'd have to bear with me.
Sure, sure.
I'm a bit slow with these things.
I know the problem.
Okay, yeah, I have that.
It is there in the small print, but these are basically screen grabs I took on the 7th of September for a week's parking, which is effectively 8 days, from the airport site. Now, you'll see that when I was looking for a week later in September, the Silver Zone was quoted at £87.99. So my first question is that your idea of low-cost parking?
I can't comment on the charges. I don't know what the airport charge and what off-site operators charge.
Well, I've helped you here
That's
because
probably
I've
a- that's
given
probably
you
a question
various
for-
screen grabs. So if we look, those are the quotes for September. Now, if we look for October, we see the prices vary. They're lower. There's no Silver Zone quote because presumably that's closed due to the rather special circumstances at the moment. If we turn over the page, a quote in November, we see that the prices have come down significantly again. Long stay is now 68. The multi-storey at £74.99 is now cheaper than the Silver Zone was at the shorter time frame.
Yeah, I mean, the prices will change as many of these things do to reflect demand. Like I say, I can't
Let's
comment on
just
the
agree.
exactly what they charge, but what you can see here is at the 7th of September, when the Silver Zone is open, it is cheaper than the multi-storey car park.
Yes, it is generally cheaper. I mean, there's significant variation, isn't there?
There's variation throughout the course of the year to reflect demand, yes.
Yeah.
Of course. But I think what we can see here is that the silver zone is a product that is charged at a lower rate, whereas the multi-storey car park, being a premium product nearer to the terminal, much nearer to the terminal, within walking distance, is charged at a higher rate.
Yeah. So if we could just look at INQ 47, which is a sheet I drew up of various costs, and over the page on it, we could go to Mr. Witchell's proof if you like, but this is kind of easier. I've reproduced Mr. Witchell's table 9.2, which is a parking cost summary.
Yes, I can see that.
So, these actually are identical to the prices I used in my proof on what passes for a viability study there, but we'll get onto that. And here, the silver zone, 48.99, long stay, 60.99, the difference is £12. I think we can probably agree this is a pricing level that rather reflects the pandemic.
I can't comment on the prices. What I take from that is that the silver zone is charged at a lower rate than the multi-storey car park, but the prices will fluctuate. But obviously, a product that is further away from the terminal is charged less, and that is consistent with how other airports operate as well.
Yeah, okay. So the variation would suggest that there's a complex algorithm working out these prices, similar to that used to determine the price of a flight. And it will vary, and I don't know the algorithm, but obviously it gets cheaper as you get further away in time. It will, as you said yourself, it will vary on demand.
Yes, I assume so, but I don't have a detailed working understanding of how the airport calculates its charges for car parking.
One makes one's assumption when one sees that one gets a quote for a day. So if I can just refer you in my proof, paragraph 5.9, where I give rough costings for different construction costs. And, this is PERSCOM from an architect who deals with car parking. But you've said yourself, I think constructing a multi-storey is...
Sorry, just to interrupt. Could you just repeat the page number? I've got a hard copy, so the actual page number.
Okay, actual page number 17.
17.
Top of the page, paragraph 5.9.
Oh, yes, I can see. Yeah, table 1.
Yeah. Now, the typical costs are quoted as a range, but one could say that the multi-storey is at least double a surface car park, and I accept that these are, this is rough.
So you're asking me to comment on the figures quoted in table 1?
Would you agree that in broad terms would you agree that the multi-storey is more expensive to construct than surface level?
Yes, and I think I can't comment on the figures. I'm not an architect, but yes, I think it's accepted by all parties that a multi-storey car park costs more to construct than surface level parking.
Yeah, but we've seen no sign that the silver zone is half the price of the multi-storey.
I can't comment on these figures. The precise figures. I can just comment on that a multi-storey car park costs more to construct than a surface level car park. I don't how that translates into what's charged for a car park. Presumably there's many factors to take into account there, not just the construction of the car park, but also the operation of the car park. I'm not in a position to comment on the specifics of those prices, but what I can say is, yes, a multi-storey car park will quite logically cost more to construct than a surface level car park.
So my point is, with the complex variation in the car parking prices, we have an algorithm that is actually looking to maximise the income over the whole parking product. And what you actually have already is effectively cross-subsidy between the more expensive construction costs of the MSP and the silver zone, and indeed probably the long stay parking is helping to subsidise the multi-storey. You build your infrastructure and then you price as you can, depending, as you've said yourself, if it's a bus ride into the airport, that's less attractive.
I don't know if that's true. I don't think it is. I think the airport charges more for the multi-storey car park, reflecting the cost of the construction of that facility. And BAL also considers the use of public transport in calculating parking charges as well.
If your pricing was not cross-subsidising and was specifically referencing the cost of construction and running, then the prices would not vary, would they?
I just can't comment on that. The prices may vary, but the pattern is that the multi-storey car park is the parking price is higher, and that reflects the construction costs associated with that facility.
It reflects a lot else as well, though, doesn't it? Because it's not double the cost of the surface parking.
As I said, there's other factors to take into account, such as the operation of these facilities. But you know, I'm not an accountant. I can't tell you how this works exactly in practice. But I think there's an established principle, which I think all parties agree to, is that a multi-storey car park costs more to construct.
Okay. You mentioned in your proof, paragraph 5.4.49, and we're talking about phasing now of different car parking options. The last sentence of that paragraph, you say, on that basis, BAL should be able to phase delivery to meet demand for different types of parking product as it arises.
Yes, that's correct.
But isn't it true that you're already adjusting to varying demand across your different parking products by using flexible pricing?
I reiterate the same.
I mean, this is just pure highways parking stuff. This has nothing to do with Greenbelt, other than some of the car parks proposed are in the Greenbelt. And a lot of these things were ours. We haven't come onto Greenbelt purposes or openness or any of those.
Yeah, I mean, I do get, Ms. Beth, I do get from your earlier comment your approach. And I understand why you're asking these questions, because you say it then has a knock-on effect on the proposal as it sits in the Greenbelt. I do understand that. The difficulty is that you're asking a lot of questions, and with respect to the witness, you're not getting very many answers, and that's not a criticism. But we have been to a lot of these places before with other witnesses who can answer.
Now, you may recall...
Can I just add one thing? Well, I was very clear, we were as a panel at the beginning of the inquiry, to make the distinction, the matters that we were going to cover in the highway session and the matters that we were going to cover in the Greenbelt session. And you will remember that I said that parking demand was an issue to be covered in the highway session, and the parking strategy, the availability of other sites, impact on the Greenbelt would be for this week.
Yes, I do understand all that. But you may also recall that when I was questioning, well, actually it was Johnny who was questioning the highway witness, we had questions about viability and we were told we couldn't put them to Mr. Witchell. And we agreed that I would put them to Mr. Melling, and you did say that therefore he would be forewarned. Viability is a planning issue. Now I'm happy to move on, but it's on that basis that I put these questions into this session.
I don't think we need to hear anything more about parking demand. I think that's what we're saying. And everything you've said so far is about parking demand. We want to put a few viability questions to the witness and do so, and then move on to Greenbelt.
Okay. Well, it is about Greenbelt, because do you need the parking or not? But, yeah, okay. Okay. So, can I refer you to CD 2.11? I think this is the parking strategy.
Yes, do you have a, so I've got a hard copy here just to confuse you, so it's, I'm not looking for the PDF numbers, but the actual
18.
document number.
Page
Sorry, the
18.
actual page number, yeah, great.
And it's paragraph, ooh. Sorry, I've got a problem here. I'm not sure I've got the right page.
Yes, you said 2.11, which is the parking demand study, but you then said the parking strategy, which is 2.12,
So this may be the problem.
maybe
isn't it?
2.12?
Yeah, okay. So I need to get up the 2 points. Bear with me now. Strategy. So that's CD 212, isn't it? Let's see what's on page 18 here. It's not that either. Okay. Bother. Right, I'm just not going to have to go there. Okay, so if we look to your next very special circumstance for development in the Green Belt, the alternative provision, there being no alternative provision. Now, you'll be aware that in my proof, I offered an alternative of deck parking. It's been raised to an extent already. And your rebuttal proof had an Appendix A, which is a technical note, alternative car parking options. And
Sorry, did you say the rebuttal?
it's Mr. Melling's rebuttal proof, Val stroke witness 7 stroke 3, and there's an Appendix A, which is a technical note comparing
Got it.
alternative car parking options.
Yep, got it, my fault.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm there.
And just to confirm, this technical note compares the visual and other impacts of the proposed surface extension to the Silver Zone with construction of a decked MS multi-storey car park in the Greenbelt inset and an alternative location of decked multi-storey construction in the Greenbelt over the existing Silver Zone.
Yes, it's a comparative study.
Yeah. And I understand the theoretical location of the assessed development on the north side Greenbelt inset is just to the east of multi-storey car park 1. Is that correct? And
Yes, I think there's a footnote. Just bear with me now.
it is a footnote, yes, quite early on.
Footnote 5, page 4 of the actual document. So apologies, I haven't got it on my screen to say what the PDF page is. But that just sets out there the assumptions.
Yeah. So I'm looking at my plan at the moment, but I'd also like to refer you to inquiry document 65. Which we've looked at previously in the landscaping section. It's a sketch really showing levels, contours, on the airport site. But in fact, and it's also taken some spot heights, Downside Road 172 and 163 further to the west. They're actually from the site visit plan. They have some spot heights on them. Now, your technical note didn't actually state the ground level of the construction it was assessing theoretically on the north side. But I did some sums. You state that development here would be about 40 metres above Downside Road. At this point, Downside Road spot height is 172. And you give this, the theoretical building you're assessing as 8.8 metres high. And so we can assume that the ground level is just over 177 metres, which would make sort of sense because the north side road is just below the 180 contour.
Yes, I'll have to take your word for that, but I haven't looked at that in detail. I mean, it's just to clarify. I mean, the comparative study was done by undertaken by a landscape architect, but it was informed by sort of an understanding of the design of MSCP2 and what might be feasible. And I think, yeah, the height is around 8 metres, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, when you're doing a zone of theoretical visibility, it is quite important to know where the ground level is of the building you're assessing.
Certainly, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I got there. Now, I'd also say that if you look at, well, we could look at the site visit plan, or we could look at the inquiry document 65. You'll see that Downside Road slopes down to the west. I think it's a point you made yourself. So it's 163 as the spot height further down.
Yes, yeah, it does.
Yeah, so there's, and in fact it slopes down again to 169 from the 172 point. So you're actually at quite a high point in the parking area for the building you've assessed.
Yes, that's right.
So if I can refer back to my proof, paragraph 5.9, I do make it clear that what we're proposing is single-decked. i.e. putting one extra level of parking above.
I think the assumption in this comparative study is a two-decked option.
Yes.
Yeah, I think you're referring to a single deck. I know there's some confusion around terminology, what is a multi-storey, what's a deck car park, but yes, I think you referred to a single deck option.
Yes.
Here. Yes, that's what you set out there.
And your double-decked, although I have to say the height of 8.8 metres would seem to me to probably include 3 decks, but anyway, you've assessed a building that is 8.8 metres high. Now, can we agree that is not the height of a single-decked?
I've said it's 2 decks.
Yes, but what we're proposing is single-decked. And what I'm suggesting to you is a maximum, the height of that would be between 4 and 4.4 metres.
Okay, yeah, I'll take your
Yeah.
word for it. Seems fairly logical.
Okay, thanks. Now, we don't necessarily need to go here. There is a core document that deals with car park design. It talks about this sort of deck. This sort of deck is actually a lot cheaper than a multi-storey, which was another point we were making, because it didn't have to be so expensive. It doesn't need foundations.
I think in your table, I mentioned this yesterday, I think you include some prices, don't you, per space for a decked car parking option. So in your proof, actual page 17, table 1.
Sure.
So I assume that's what you're talking about. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, it is cheaper. It actually surprised me. It wasn't as cheap as I was expecting, but there we go.
Well, yeah, I would say just on that, my observation there is that it's still, if you look at the higher end, according to your figures, it's still double the price of a surface car park per space, and actually not too dissimilar to a a multi-storey car park per space,
Yeah.
according to your
Yeah.
figures.
Yeah, it's to a certain extent cheaper. It's also, I mean, you know, it's also more flexible. So the sort of long, thin sites, those leftover long stay parking areas, would suit that better, wouldn't it?
I'm not sure if it
Confidently.
would. I think the issue with a single deck is it just wouldn't provide the capacity that's needed, because you know you would still lose some spaces for columns and pillars and things like that. I mean, accessibility would also be an issue in that area, I think, you know, because of the flow of traffic and the need for the gyratory. So I think that's an issue as well. And you know, if I just take your figures from table 1, you would, you know, there's an issue here. You would have to charge more for that, for the construction. The construction of that facility would be more than a surface level option. And so the airport would necessarily have to charge passengers more to park.
Your technical note, though, has undertaken a visibility appraisal. It's used the zone of technical visibility, and it's done it on a building of 8.8 metres, so presume at a particularly high point on the site. So presumably you accept that that is really not very relevant for our proposal.
Well, I think it's relevant in terms of the options that were considered. So, you know, realistic, you know, or reasonable alternatives to the silver zone that were considered here. You know, in the parking strategy, whilst it wasn't accompanied by a comparative assessment such as this, there was a general consideration of deck car parking in that area. And I think, you know, because of exactly what you say, it's a higher area of land. Deck car parking, even at 4 metres, would I expect have an impact on those receptors alongside downside roads, the north of that area. And again, I think there would be a sort of, you'd have to look at the total massing of that area as well. There'd be a lot of higher rise development concentrated in the inset.
Yeah, but let's make it clear, the proposal you looked at is not the one we are suggesting, which could go much more broadly over parts of the site and is much lower. I mean, if I can draw your attention
Not in the comparative assessment considered, to be clear, a 2-decked option, which is different to your option. The parking strategy, not informed by this assessment, but in discussion with landscape architects, did consider a decked stroke multi-storey car park option.
So it has no relevance, the visual impact assessment has no relevance for our proposal.
This comparative assessment hasn't explicitly considered a 4-metre high single-decked car parking option. But I think what it does demonstrate is the sensitivity of those receptors to the north of the airport site.
So you'd see that, I think it's your figure 1 connected to that technical note that looks at the visibility. It's at the back of that same annex to the rebuttal.
Yes, and the height of the facility will obviously have an impact on those zones. Yes, I agree with that. That's quite logical. But I still maintain there's because of even a single decked option, it would still potentially have more significant impacts on residential receptors along Downside Road. Just more fundamentally, it won't deliver the capacity that's needed. And I think that's a key issue as well.
I'll come on to the Downside Road, and that would, of course, depend where this was located.
Yes.
But if we can just look at this figure, well, I mean, it's got limited relevance, really, but it has, in fact, let's go on to Downside Road before we come back to that one. And basically, when you're looking at Downside Road, you are looking at visual receptors, really, aren't you? You're not looking at, for example, noise or impact.
Principally visual impact.
Yeah, that's what was assessed here. So residential
that's what was
amenity.
considered here, yeah.
Yeah, that's what was considered here. Okay, so firstly, I would like to draw your attention to the landscape visual impact assessment, which was undertaken as part of the application. It is CD 2.5.21.
Again, sorry, you just have to
Yes,
bear with
okay,
me
me too.
a second.
And we're looking for paragraph 9.12.4.
Is this the non-technical summary?
No, this is a landscape visual impact assessment, CD 2.5.21.
Oh, sorry, yeah, two. Just it will take a little while just to
Yeah. No,
to
I
appear.
haven't got there, it's okay.
Okay, yep.
So 9.12.4. So you talk here about the visual receptors on Downside Road, and you'll see at the beginning of that paragraph says
Sorry, which paragraph was it again? Sorry.
9.12.4. It is on, they're not, 58 of the PDF. They don't seem to be page
58.
numbers. It says, views south to Bristol Airport for subgroups along Downside Road are substantially screened by the perimeter bunding and the dense belt of woodland planting along the northern boundary of Bristol Airport. And if we look again at that site visit map, we will see that there is in fact a significant area of bunding between, as there should be, between the parking and those residential properties.
Yes, there is some screening, yes.
If you look at the aerial photographs, you'll find that it is, as described in the landscape visual impact assessment, substantial belt of woodland, which is... Well, I would also suggest that in terms of residential impact, and, you know, it has to be said, it may well be that you don't build that close to those buildings, but a single-storey 4.4 metre high is very, very different in terms of impact to a multi-storey of 8.8 metres. Can we agree that?
It's different, but I think there would still be an impact on those receptors. Obviously, yeah, it's quite logical that height has a bearing on that.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll leave it there. Certainly, our case is that there is alternative parking available in the Greenbelt Inset that hasn't been considered properly.
I think, just very, very brief, in response, I think it has been considered both in the parking strategy and subsequently in this comparative analysis. And the comparative analysis has been undertaken by that work's been undertaken by Mr. Ferber, who you did cross-examine, and he is a qualified landscape architect. So I turn to him
Mr.
for his
Ferber
judgment.
has considered the impact of a building 8.8 metres high on one of the highest points of the site, of the parking site at the Greenbelt Inset, hasn't he?
In this comparative assessment, yes, but the parking strategy also considered deck parking in this location. And I think you say it hasn't been considered properly. We've looked at it, and we've looked at the capacity such a facility would provide and the type of demand that such a facility would cater for. and that doesn't align with the evidence that's presented in the parking demand study update and which has been validated by Mr. Witchell. So that's our position.
Okay. I'll move on. Last bits of my questions, really. Looking at the potential visual impact of the Silver Zone extension, and we'll stay with this plan and figure 1, because helpfully this technical note has also assessed the visual impact of the Silver Zone extension. So if we're on figure 1, my understanding is that elements shaded yellow and green are places where the Silver Zone extension is visible. We can see that from the key.
Theoretically visible.
Theoretically visible.
In the way that, I mean, again, I'm not like a landscape architect, but in the way that these ZTVs are run, from memory, I'm not sure how much account they take of things like gradients and screening, for example. But it's a theoretical zone of influence, yes.
And it shows a swathe of areas where the car park will be visible in long views from the Mendip Hills AONB to the south.
Theoretically visible, but it doesn't come to a judgment as to the scale of any visibility. As I said, these are questions really for a landscape witness, but I'm happy to try and answer them as best I can.
Okay, but they were submitted as part of your proof, Mr. Melling, so...
But you're talking about impacts on the AONB here, aren't you? And I think Mr. Ferber dealt with that matter in...
well, we've had that discussion previously.
But anyway.
I'm pointing out that the visibility, the long views are visible from the AONB.
Possibly theoretically visible, yes.
Yeah. Well, your paragraph 2.2.6 in your technical note, page 8, does state that this area is substantially wooded, which presumably is why you think it's more theoretical. Would that be right?
Sorry, where are we looking now? Sorry?
Page 8, still on the technical note on car parking, alternative car parking options.
So which paragraph exactly? Because I think what it says here is that the south side option coincides with the
2.2.6 is the paragraph I'm referring to.
2.6.
Towards the bottom of that paragraph, it is noted that the majority of this area of the AMB is covered by woodland that substantially limits the availability of outward views.
Yes, that was the view of Mr. Ferber when he undertook his site visit, and it was the view of the landscape architect who, I think it corresponds to the view of the landscape architect that undertook the LVIA as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the plan, you've got the figure there, have you? If you look at your figure, you'll see that due south of Blagdon Lake, which is a reservoir, in fact, it's open land as shown on the plan. But we'll leave that aside. There is a fair bit of woodland there, I grant you that. But my next question is, would you accept that with deciduous woodland, the screening effect is much less effective in winter?
Yes, I assume it would be less effective. And I think from memory, when the landscape and visual impact assessment was undertaken, they would have undertaken it at a time when, because they want to look at the worst case when there was less cover. I'd need to go back and check exactly when the site visits were undertaken for that assessment. But I think the important point is that the airport from the AONB is rarely visible, and it's hard to distinguish specific parts of the airport. I think that's the conclusion, that the LVIA and Mr. Ferber have come to. And therefore, the development of the, you know, as you discussed with Mr. Ferber, the development of the Silver Zone car park extension phase 2 would have only a negligible impact on the AONB. And that was accepted by officers as well. And presumably members, because there wasn't a reason for refusal.
Yes, and would it surprise you to know that Mr. Ferber also accepted that the location of the Silver Zone extension was within the setting of the AONB?
It may be in the setting, but the harm is negligible.
Right. So, last question really, and it's a referral back to your proof. Paragraph 5.4.38. You're talking
Yes.
about the existing seasonal car park being restricted by condition to use only in the summer peak. You talk about, you say that you consider this an inefficient use of space and resource, presumably land.
Yes, that's correct. An inefficient use of that facility, because it could be used all year round. It's an existing facility that's there, and it's well serviced by the other ancillary uses that are located to the south of the airport site, such as the Silver Zone reception building.
Do you accept that the reason for this seasonal limitation was to reduce the impact on the green belt, and actually, I don't know if this was the thinking behind it, but it also reduces the impact on the setting of the AONB?
I think the reason for the condition I accept was related to the green belt, but I don't think, from memory, the original condition related to the AONB.
I think you're probably right.
Because there's a negligible impact on the AONB. But yeah. The intention was to minimise impact on the green belt, yes.
Yeah. Okay, that's... Oh, how about that? 1 hour.
Thanks very much indeed. Mr. Humphreys, have you got any or much re-examination? Just thinking about the timing.
I would think I have about 25 minutes.
Okay, let's carry on, re-examine, and then we'll take a break, and obviously we're switching witnesses at that point. So yeah, carry on, please.
Mr. Melling, first issue, you were asked a number of questions about the proposed landscape bund for the Silver Zone extension and interruption of short distance views and effect on openness. Are there many short distance views of the Silver Zone extension that any such bund would actually interrupt?
No, I think this is the point that maybe I didn't make terribly clear, but there's very limited and fleeting views of the car park from Winters Lane, which we looked at. The existing views are screened by existing vegetation, so any bund is sort of similar to that wider context, really, and consistent with it.
So, to that extent, would openness in the way that it was being put to you be compromised by the proposed landscape funding?
No, it wouldn't be. And over time, that landscape fund would mature and form part of the wider countryside setting.
And you made the point about, obviously, existing screening, and the inspectors will have been on site and seen, obviously, hedges and tree belts and other things. Are such features, in fact, a perfectly normal, common feature of areas of countryside?
Yeah, yes, they are. And, as I said just now, as the landscape fund matures, it will form part. It will, form part of that wider setting.
Second point related to that, we can see, I suggest we don't need to look it up, but we can, if we looked at the original officer's report and we looked at the proposed conditions, condition 27 was a condition requiring landscape, including the bund, and if we look at the presently proposed condition 20 that we'll presumably discuss on Friday, again there's a landscape condition. What is your understanding of the council's position on the need for landscaping of the Silverzone extension?
Yeah, it's needed to minimise the landscape and visual impacts of those elements of the development, and it's consistent with, as I'm sure inspectors will be aware, because they will have seen the existing bund, which was agreed with officers as part of the development of the current seasonal car park as well.
And then third point, again related, but a little bit later on you were asked about lighting and lighting columns and so on. Again, is there a proposed condition, should planning permission be granted, in relation to the scheme of lighting for the car parking?
Yes, there's a requirement to provide lighting details,
And
which is quite normal. Yes.
did the council refuse planning permission on landscaping or indeed lighting grounds?
No, it didn't feature in the reasons for refusal.
Fourth point, slightly different point now. You were taken to the airport's 2019 accounts. We have those as INQ 078.
You'll just have to bear with me while I dig those out. Okay, yes.
And you were taken to page 42. So let's PDF page 42. Let's just go there first.
Yes, that's got
And-
that. It's headed turnover, I think.
Yes, and you were taken to the figures on turnover and aeronautical revenue and car parking revenue and concession revenue and other revenue. And you made the point that, look, these are revenue figures and that one has to take into account, obviously, costs, and you made the point in relation to car parks, capital costs and financing costs. Just hold in your mind for a moment that figure, the total there, 116,810, revenue 116,810, and turn please to page 26. Do you have that?
Yes.
And these are the profit and loss figures. And if you look at the top, turnover, you get 116,810, and it's note 5, and that's what we were looking at on page 42, note 5, and those figures.
That's one side of the equation.
Yes. Now, if one just goes through the accounts, one gets to an operating profit, which is reduced from 116 million down to 15 million. But then, of course, one has to take into account finance costs and taxes. That's taxes ES on the end, not, I don't want to get Ms. Beth excited at this point, which then result in an overall financial loss, because obviously there are finance losses of a loss of 33 million for the year. And if you turn back to, I think it's going to be page 43, PDF page 43, you get the finance costs, which lead to that overall loss, and you can see a lot of those are interest payable on bank loans and shareholder loans and loan issue costs and so on. So in order to build infrastructure, whether it's car parks, whatever, but let's take the example of car parks, does that have to be paid for and financed?
Yes. Yes, it does.
And therefore, is it reasonable, if one's trying to understand the way in which these things may be financed, simply to look at the revenue, or does one actually have to take into account the fact that there has to be a capital outlay and that has to be financed?
Yes, as I think I said yesterday in my cross-examination, there's two sides of the equation. I mean, I'm not an accountant, but it seems pretty obvious to me that you've got your revenue, but then you've also got your costs, and those costs, in the case of a car park, include the capex, so the construction costs. They include operational costs, and they also include the finance costs as well.
And fifth point, moving on very slightly, you were then asked a number of questions about viability, and you made it very clear that there's no need for a viability assessment, that what you're looking at is, and you've discussed this earlier, in fact, this morning with Ms. Beth, the relative capital costs of multi-storey or decked car parking versus surface car parking, and the need to be able to recover sufficient income on that to pay for that. Is there any requirement, either in law or policy, or were you asked by officers to produce a viability assessment for a multi-storey car park or additional multi-storey car parks?
No, there's not. It's. I know there are for things like affordable housing, but this is different. This is a car park, and you can see. I think the accounts demonstrate the importance of taking both sides of the equation into account, as I said.
And you mentioned affordable housing. In fact, the core strategy, we don't probably need to look it up, but the core strategy CD 5.6, in fact, policy CS 16 is an affordable housing policy that requires viability assessment. Is there any equivalent policy in relation to the greenbelt in the core strategy that requires viability assessment?
No, there's not.
Again, you asked a number of questions about the location of multi-storey car parks or deck car parking in the greenbelt inset. Have you seen any positive case from North Somerset Council that it would be either possible or, if possible, appropriate to locate a further multi-storey car park or decked car park in the greenbelt inset?
No, I think Mr. Gertler referred to somewhere in front of the hotel in his cross-examination, or it might have been his evidence in chief or both, but there's nothing in his proof of evidence on that. I've not seen any plans showing where a suitable alternative could be located.
And insofar as the council appeared to suggest that a viability assessment is necessary, have you seen one from the council?
No.
Obviously, for the council to make out its case, so far as it needs to, if I move on to point 6, I think here we're dealing with some questions from Ms. Sutherland, and she put it to you that the airport funds NSC enforcement of off-airport car parks. You said you didn't think that was correct. I can tell you on instruction it is not correct. The airport does not currently fund enforcement of off-airport car parking or an officer.
Yes, that confirms my understanding, yes.
But it is proposing to do so, as you rightly pointed to. Could you just look, Mr. Gertler actually had a very helpful footnote on this. Could you look at Mr. Gertler's proof, if you have it, on his page, I think it was 23. Yes, his footnote 18. Tell me when you've got that.
Did you say of his proof page? Is this
Mr. Gertler's proof.
PDF page 23?
I'm afraid it's actual page 23. So.
Oh right, okay, that's fine. I'm going there.
It's a footnote to paragraph 82.
Yes, I've got that. Yes.
And in footnote 18, he helpfully sets out the numbers of off-site car parks, 39 of them, purporting to operate under the 28-day permitted development provisions. He sets out, in addition to the unofficial sites, there are those that are unauthorized, against which the council takes targeted action. The council proactively monitors unofficial and unauthorized sites, and since 2003 has had in excess of 40 enforcement notices. 5 were not appealed, 1 awaiting decision, and all bar 1 appealed against the notices were dismissed. They've also prosecuted. So Sutherland was, I think, putting the proposition to you that really enforcement action hadn't had any success. Is that a fair characterization of what the council has been doing and what the airport is proposing to support?
No, I think that'd be a disservice to the council. And I didn't mention yesterday, but I also note, and I think I do mention this in my proof of evidence, that the council has actually been successful as well in securing funding from CLG towards enforcement. So I think that goes to show again the importance the council places on undertaking enforcement activity, and presumably it wouldn't undertake that activity if it wasn't going to be successful.
What does this tell us, however, the sheer scale of these numbers of sites and the evidence we've heard from local residents about the importance of providing adequate on-site airport car parking?
Yes, well, I think it's an agreed position between myself and Mr. Gertler that this is an issue. It was recognised in the officer's report, and as I've said, if sufficient capacity isn't provided on site, then you would have to conclude that at least a proportion of that capacity would go to off-site operators, which could result in an increase in the adverse impacts associated with those operations on local communities and on the local environment.
Seventh point, you were taken to your rebuttal appendix B, which is the competition law note, and you very properly made the point that you're not a lawyer and certainly not a competition lawyer, and neither am I. Well, I'm the first, I suppose, but not the second.
No, I'm not on either, no.
But when you were taken to the note, Mr. Taylor sort of went rather quickly past paragraphs 2 and 3 and focused on paragraph 4. But I just want to take you back to paragraph 2 and 3. And 2 talks about it costs considerably more to construct a multi-storey car park than a surface car park, and we know that that's agreed between all the parties. Hence, the suggestion that BAL construct MSCP 2 and 3 and offer parking at either of these facilities at rates akin to rates charged for surface car parking some distance away would arouse suspicions if BAL were to do so. So we start with that point, but then paragraph 3, the UK competition rules contained in the Competition Act 1998 apply to both anti-competitive agreements arrangements and to unilateral conduct by a business with market power. Now, you were asked a lot of questions about agreements or arrangements, but the note clearly also refers to unilateral conduct. Now, in that context, and in the context that we know the local car park operators have litigated in the past, what is your view about the potential risk of the inspectors relying on the airport being able to cross-subsidize in some way its multi-storey car parks so as to offer them at below a price which reflects the cost of building them?
Well, I think the advice here is, it says that there is a competition law risk. Paragraph 2 here says would arouse suspicions if BAL were to do so. And then in paragraph 4, as you say, it actually refers to a unilateral decision on this as well. So I assume, again, not an expert, that is not necessarily in agreement with the council, but a decision it takes of its own accord to lower the prices artificially of a multi-storey car park.
And then two points from this morning about decked car parking, and you were asked about the single deck car parking suggestion made by XR elders, and you made the point about that not providing sufficient capacity. Can we just look at the site layout plan again, CD 1.8? And I want to sort of focus in somewhat on the north side area and in particular the surface level car parking areas alongside Downside Road and within the area of the gyratory.
Mm-hmm.
Firstly, if we look at those areas, we can see, as well as the blocks of car parking, a large number of roads. Why are they important?
I think I made this point yesterday. I might not have mentioned it this morning, but one of the constraining issues with the north side of the site is the need to ensure that there's sufficient circulation through the airport site, and indeed that's one of the very reasons why the gyratory is included as part of this scheme.
And you mentioned that one of the consequences of building decked car parking, and indeed even a single deck would have this effect, is that because of as you put it, columns and pillars, you would actually lose existing car parking. What about the need to have ramps to get up to higher levels?
Yes, well, I think you can see quite clearly there that the design of that gyratory would need to be significantly adjusted, and I think it would result in a lot further loss of spaces, so beyond those associated with the columns and pillars, as I put it. Not a very technical term, but yes, there would be the ramps that you would need to get onto the top of the deck. Even if it was a single deck, would inevitably result in some further loss of spaces as well. So your net gain would be reduced even further.
What about if one doesn't look within the gyratory but just along the boundary of Downside Road? Do the same points apply?
Well, you still need ramps to reach a higher deck in that area. And it's, as I said, I think yesterday, it's still really important to remember that the north side of the airport also plays a role in facilitating circulation through the airport site.
And there seemed to be a suggestion at one point, I think, from Ms. Beth, that the decks wouldn't just have to be within the gyratory, they might be close up against the boundary with Downside Road. What's your view of that in terms of having decked car parking close up against that boundary?
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple of points. So the first, from a practical perspective, if you're going to deck more of that area, again, it would be very hard, I think, to retain the circulation through the site. It would certainly increase the sort of massing of that area, and as I mentioned, the impacts, the landscape and visual impacts of such a option would be I consider more significant than an option involving surface level car parking to the south of the airport site that's on lower levels of land.
Has there, to your knowledge, ever been any suggestion from council officers that such a solution would be acceptable in residential amenity terms?
No, I think the officer's report is quite clear that it accepts that there's no further capacity in the NSET for either surface level car parking or further multi-storey car parking beyond MSCP 1, MSCP 2 and MSCP 3.
So, final point, in your rebuttal, which again you had taken to, and the Appendix A, Landscape and Visual Comparative Study, you had taken in that to the comparative zone of theoretical visibility. That's figure 1. I apologise, I haven't got the PDF for people that are looking at PDFs, but it's the penultimate page in Appendix 1. And you are asked about views from the AONB by reference to the different colours. If we just, for a moment, understand what the colours are. So yellow is elements of the proposed Phase 2 Silver Zone Extension car park only may be seen. B is the decked car park, and blue is the decked car park, and green is both. As far as this decked car parking is concerned, which we've been discussing, what areas are there that would be seen, that only the north side option would be visible from? I think it's the blue. Are there many areas?
So this is the south side. So the blue is the south side option. So this considered a. If I'm looking at, am I looking at the correct figure? Are you?
I think
you
I'm
said
on figure
penultimate
one.
figure. Are you on the first figure? Sorry.
I'm on the first figure.
Ah.
Sorry.
It's a bit
Sorry, the
complicated.
north side option, because that's, I don't think XR elders are suggesting the,
Yeah, no, that's fine. Sorry.
the southern option.
Hence my confusion. Yeah, so you can see there are a considerable number of areas there that would be visible to an alternative decked car parking option, specifically focused around the north of the airport side.
Yes. Yes, and again, in landscape terms, is that, apart from residential amenity, is that an appropriate option?
I think I've concluded that it's not an appropriate option.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that's everything. I'm slightly over, but only 2 or 3
Okay.
minutes.
Thanks very much, Mr. Humphreys, and thank you, Mr. Milling, 1. See you later on.
I look forward to the sequel.
Yeah. Let's take a break. Let's take a break till 20 to 12, please, and then obviously we're switching sides for your next witness, Mr. Taylor. Okay, 20 to 12.
Okay, yeah, welcome back, everyone. We're now on to planning, which is, are we on the, do I dare say we're on the sort of home straight? I don't know. It seems, yeah, it's been a long time coming, but anyway, so Mike seems to have a bit of feedback, so hopefully I won't have to say too much. Over to you, Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Madam. Madam, as Mr. Gutler's already been introduced to the inquiry, I'm not going to go through that process again. So what we propose to do is to take his evidence as read, and I'm just going to ask some questions which hopefully will flush out the relevant policy issues and where we get to in terms of the balance. Mr. Gertler, good morning. Can we start, please, by looking at the aviation policy framework, which we've got, I think, as CD 6.01.
Bear with me 1 second.
Sure.
Sorry, my computer
You're
closed.
having IT issues.
It closed every single PDF down. So,
I've got so many open I can't even figure out which one is where.
so 1 second. It's not opened it yet. The aviation policy framework.
That's it, CD 6.01. And in that document, can we turn to page 9 of the PDF, please?
Yes.
At paragraph 5, we can see under heading the benefits of aviation, the government explains that its primary objective is to achieve long-term economic growth. The aviation sector is a major contributor to the economy, and we support its growth within a framework which maintains a balance between the benefits of aviation and its costs, particularly particularly its contribution to climate change and noise. You see that?
I see that.
Now, that's in the executive summary. What unconditional support for aviation growth is there in the APF?
Well, that doesn't say it is unconditional. That specifically says it supports its growth within a framework, and then there's the balance, maintaining a balance between the benefits of aviation and its costs, and it specifically mentions climate change and noise.
So, in what circumstances does a proposal for airport expansion obtain the support of the APF?
If you bear with me, let me get my hard copy. If you turn to page 10,
Yes.
and in paragraph 12, it talks about aviation's impacts, and then it says the objective is to ensure that aviation sector makes a significant and cost-effective contribution towards reducing global emissions. So that is one of the requirements.
Yeah.
There's a second one if you turn on to page 29, which is paragraph 1.57. And that says one of the main aviation objectives is to ensure the UK's air links continue to make one of the best connected countries in the world, goes on to emerging markets. It refers to economic growth. But to achieve the objective, they recognise both the importance of hub capability, and then in the final sentence there it says this must be done in a way consistent with high-level policy set out in the document.
Yes, and so to what extent, well, let me put it this way, in what circumstances can an airport expansion proposal obtain the support of the APF in light of those passages and the paragraph 5 we were looking at before?
Well, when it addresses the issues associated with the costs for it, so climate change and noise are two of the key criteria that get mentioned.
Right.
So,
Thank you. In that context, to what extent is that approach acknowledged, particularly in relation to airport expansion outside of London?
Let me just scroll back. If you go back to page 22 and paragraph 124, that specifically refers to the government wanting to see the best use of existing airport capacity. It supports growth of airports, and then it mentions outside of London, including the southeast of England. However, we recognise that the development of airports can have negative as well as positive local impacts, including local noise levels. We therefore consider that proposals for expansion of these airports should be judged on their individual merits, taking careful account of all relevant considerations, particularly economic and environmental impacts. So that is the criteria outside of the southeast, London.
Yes. Now, we saw in paragraph 5 of the executive summary, the first part of the APF we went to, a reference to the contribution of aviation to climate change in the context of maintaining a balance between the benefits of aviation and its costs. To what extent is any support for expansion that the APF provides dependent upon such expansion being compatible with ensuring the attainment of climate change obligations?
Well, it needs to be compatible with ensuring it. You've obviously had different climate change experts comment, and Mr. Oostend-Ireland, or is it Dr. Oostend-Ireland, I think in your cross-examination of him, points were raised about the assessment that demonstrates that there isn't currently an assessment demonstrating that the expansion would be compatible with the climate change targets now.
And so what is the consequence in terms of the APF and the extent to the extent to which it provides support for airport expansion?
Again, the cross-examination and also Dr. Hinnell's evidence was very much about whether the APF is up to date. It's 2013. It was on the basis of the 80% reduction. It hasn't had the opportunity to be updated to look at the 6th carbon budget or the net zero target. So in terms of supporting the expansion of Bristol using the APF, there would have to be questions about whether the policy is up to date and whether you can give it much weight, whether it's just little weight would be attached to the APF.
Yes. So what weight have you given the APF in terms of if it does provide support for expansion at Bristol, what weight have you given that in the planning balance?
Subsequently, when we talk about the planning balance, I've given it little weight.
Thank you. let's move on and look at MBU next. We've got that at, I think, CD 6.04.
Sorry.
And I wanted to take us in that document to page 10, I think, of the PDF, and to paragraph 1.29. This is a paragraph
Okay.
we've seen before at the inquiry, I think, and it says, therefore, the government is supportive of airports beyond Heathrow making best use of their existing runways. However, we recognise that the development of airports can have negative as well as positive local impacts, including on noise levels. We therefore consider that any proposals should be judged by the relevant planning authority, taking careful account of all relevant considerations, particularly economic and environmental impacts and proposed mitigations. This policy statement does not prejudge the decision of those authorities who will be required to give proper consideration to such applications. Instead, it leaves it up to the local rather than national government to consider each case on its merits. So, to what extent is the support for further growth in MBU conditional?
Again, it is not unconditional. Support for expansion has to be established that the benefits of the proposed development outweigh the costs.
So, what, in principle, support for airport expansion is provided by MBU?
I would say there is no in principle support for the airport expansion. It only provides support for a scheme there once it has been established that the benefits outweigh the costs.
Okay. Now, I asked some questions in the context of climate change in the APF earlier. Let's explore the same issue in respect of MBU. How does, to what extent is MBU up to date or out of date in the context of the 6 carbon budget and the obligation to ensure attainment of net zero 2050?
Well, it preceded the 6th carbon budget. It was 2018. It also preceded the government's commitment to net zero, so it was based on the 80% reduction. It was based on the DFT aviation forecast from 2017, which obviously also preceded those budgets. So it was examining capacity based on the 80% 2050 target. Can you ask your question again? Sorry.
Yes. So to what extent is MBU up to date or out of date in the context of the 6th carbon budget and the net zero 2050?
On that basis, it is not up to date. It is out of date. It hasn't taken into account either the 6th carbon budget or net zero.
Thank you. And so, given that conclusion, what weight do you give any support that MBU might provide to airport expansion of Bristol if it were established that the benefits outweigh the harm?
If the benefits outweigh the harm, MBU hasn't taken into account the 6th carbon budget or net zero. So support from MBU, as I said before, is out of date. And as with the APF, I would say that little weight can be given to it.
Thank you. Now, let's move on from MBU to look at Aviation 2050. I think that's CD 6.5. And perhaps you
Sorry,
could
bear
help.
with me a second, I just want to highlight something. Okay. Yep.
So we've looked at the nature of the support for expansion, the conditional support for expansion in APF and MBU. To what extent does Aviation 2050 indicate that the government's support for growth is conditional?
Sorry. Sorry, my documents are only 43%. If you go to page 14,
14, yeah.
14, just trying to scroll down.
Yeah, we're in the executive summary.
It is the executive summary, but I've just lost it.
Yeah, at the top of the page there we've got in the blue box, the UK has the largest aviation network in Europe, third largest in the world. Aviation directly contributes at least 22 billion to the economy, supports around 500,000 jobs. The government supports the growth of aviation and the benefits this would deliver, provided that growth takes place in a sustainable way with actions to mitigate the environmental impacts. What do you say the words "provided that" mean there?
Well, they're quite key. So again, it's not unconditional, it's specifically conditional. Provided that suggests that there is a condition, the growth of aviation with the benefits it delivers is conditional upon the growth taking place in a sustainable way. And then it's got the actions to mitigate the environmental impacts.
Yeah. Let's turn then on the same document to page 20 of the PDF. This is in section 1, the role of aviation in a changing world. We see in the blue box the...
Sorry, I've just not got there yet. Page 20 in the PDF.
Yeah. We've got a blue box above the heading Introduction.
Sorry, I keep looking at the number to the left. It says 20 and then 22 of 200. Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
In the blue box, we see reference to aviation being important, reference to competitiveness and global reach. There are many challenges that aviation faces, such as meeting rising passenger demand whilst addressing environmental impacts and making the most of new technologies. The government supports the growth of aviation, provided that this is done in a sustainable way. And then if we go on to 1.3...
It actually repeats that from the blue box. It also repeats it in 1.2. The last sentence in there also says, provided that it's done in a sustainable way.
And balances growth with the need to address environmental impacts. Again, what do we see here in terms of the approach that Aviation 2050 is taking in terms of the nature of support for expansion of airports?
Yeah, in terms of 1.2 in the blue box, it is conditional. It's provided that. So that is a conditional comment. It's got done in a sustainable way. And then if you did go down to 1.3, which I think you mentioned, about 4 or 5 lines up from the bottom, it talks about it supports, the government supports airports throughout the UK making best use of their existing runways, subject to environmental issues being addressed. So again, you've got two sets of words. You've got provided that and subject to. They are conditional. So growth is supported provided that it's done in a sustainable way and subject to environmental issues being addressed. There's quite a few places in the document where those provisos are repeated.
All right, thank you. Now, I want to turn away from looking at the nature of supporting national aviation policy and on to consideration of the concept of sharing the benefits. Now, if we go back to the APF, please, and we go to page 8 of CD 6.1 in the PDF.
Sorry, what page is that?
It's page 8,
Eight.
hopefully.
Thank you.
And I want to look at paragraph 3, where it refers to the APF being informed by the 600 plus responses received to the 2011 scoping document, the 500 responses received to the 2012 consultation. And it says this is underpinned by 2 core principles. And the first is collaboration. By working together with industry regulators, experts, local communities and others at all levels, we believe we will be better able to identify workable solutions to the challenges and share the benefits of aviation in a fairer way than in the past. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Now, as a core principle, what is that explaining to the reader in terms of the approach that government is choosing to adopt from the point of publication of the APF?
Well, it says the benefits of aviation need to be shared in a fairer way than that was in the past. So if you wanted to look at it in terms of, say, Bristol and the 10 million application back in 2011, maybe the assumptions there or the assumptions there on the benefits would be different to what the APF requires. It wants a fairer way of sharing those benefits from the past.
All right, sticking with the theme, let's just look at what MBU has to say about this. CD 604, page 9, paragraph 1.22, please, Mr. Gertler.
1.22. Okay.
So it's page 9, Mr. Humphreys, of MBU in the PDF.
So that's page 8 on the hard copy.
Page 8 in the hard copy, yes. Paragraph 122. It says that under local environmental impacts, the government recognises the impacts on communities living near airports and understands their concerns over local environmental issues, particularly noise, air quality and surface access. As airports look to make best use of their existing runways, it's important that communities surrounding those airports share in the economic benefits of this and that adverse impacts such as noise are mitigated where possible. So, to what extent do we see MBU elaborating on one of the core principles of the APF there?
Well, in this case, in that 6th or so line, it says communities surrounding those airports. So it's describing people who live near the airport should also share in the economic benefits that arise. And then so going back to the previous one, it is again sharing the benefits, but this one is specifically those communities surrounding the airport.
Right, okay. Now we saw reference to noise there, and the APF has a noise chapter, CD 601, and it starts on, I think, page 55 of the PDF. Let's just have a look at that. Page 55, Mr. Humphreys, of the PDF of
Chapter 3.
It's chapter 3 of the APF. And this chapter is headed Noise and Other Local Environmental Impacts. And the context for the entire chapter is set out paragraph 3.1, which refers to the aviation industry bringing significant benefits to the UK economy. There are costs associated with its local environmental impacts which are borne by those living around airports, some of whom may not use the airport or directly benefit from its operations. This chapter considers noise, air quality and other local environmental impacts. So, from that paragraph, what is the government recognising in terms of who bears the costs of the local environmental impacts?
But in this paragraph, it specifically says those living around the airports.
Yeah.
And it does say they may not use the airport and they may not directly benefit from its operations, but so the local community again bears the costs, some of whom bear the cost.
Yeah. Then as we look down, we've got the heading noise.
Sorry, I said that wrong. The some of whom may not use the airport. The local community bears the cost, sorry.
Yeah. We've got the heading noise, and then paragraph 332 is a recognition of the primary concern of local communities near airports. And at 3.3, it says this: we want to strike a fair balance between the negative impacts of noise on health, amenity, quality of life and productivity, and the positive economic impact of flights. As a general principle, the government therefore expects that future growth in aviation should ensure that benefits are shared between the aviation industry and local communities. So just looking at that, which local community are the benefits to be shared with in terms of the benefits of growth? Who is it who is to benefit?
So it specifically says local communities, and then if you refer back to paragraph 3.1, those are those living around the airports. It's the immediate.
Okay. The next sentence says, this means that the industry must continue to reduce and mitigate noise as airport capacity grows. As noise levels fall with technology improvements, the aviation industry should be expected to share the benefits from these improvements. How does those sentences, how do they play out in terms of the considerations the inspector's got to take into account in this inquiry?
In terms of future growth, which is obviously what the planning application is, it says that this should ensure that the benefits are shared between the industry and the local communities. So the people living around the airport, they need to share the benefits that arise from the development. It talks about the fair balance between the negative impacts. And there we've got issues of, in terms of noise, issues that we've discussed with Mr. Fiumicelli, Dr. Broomfield, Dr. Piper. So it's health, amenity and quality of life. Those issues need to be addressed. That's the negative impacts that the local community, those living around the airport, face.
And we can see reference to noise levels falling with technology improvements. And in the previous sentence, a reference to this means that the industry must continue to reduce and mitigate noise as airport capacity grows. To what extent is this paragraph of the APF expecting growth to occur with reduction in noise levels still being achieved?
I would say it is expecting it, and that was part of the evidence given by Mr. Fiumicelli and also on Bale's behalf by Mr. Williams, the expansion of the airport, particularly, I mean, there was a lot of discussion about the night flights and the adverse impacts upon the communities, the large population living around the airport. Again, when the local residents gave their opportunity, were given their opportunity to speak, they talked about how they were disturbed, considerably disturbed, how their sleep was disturbed. And so in terms of noise and impacts on health and the quality of life of those living around the airport, those adverse impacts need to be avoided.
Thank you. Now, in terms of the economic benefits, you've pointed to the 3.1 and referring to those living around the airport. What assessment has Bristol Airport Limited produced which examines the economic benefit that would be experienced if planning permission is granted by those living around the airport who experience the noise impacts?
Mr. Brass's evidence seemed to be on a sort of broad scale. So you had North Somerset, the southwest, and I think he accepted that it wasn't fine-grained, that it didn't go down to the immediate local level.
And so, what does that mean in terms of Bristol Airport Limited being able to demonstrate that the economic benefits of its growth will be shared by those living around the airport who experience its local environmental impacts?
From the evidence given, that there hasn't been anything to demonstrate that the economic benefits are going to be shared with those living around the airport. So back to 3.1, they bear the costs, but there hasn't been anything at that detailed level that shows what the benefits would be for them.
Given that conclusion, to what extent does the evidence demonstrate that the expansion of Bristol Airport achieves one of the two core principles of the APF?
The evidence doesn't show that it achieves that. There is no evidence to show that.
All right, thank you. Let's move away then from looking at that to the development plan. So away from the national aviation context, and I think it's agreed that the development plan, which is relevant for the purpose of this appeal, consists of the core strategy and the sites and policies plan. Is that right?
Yes, the statement of common ground referred to which policies were agreed.
And it's also agreed, I believe, that the relevant policies are consistent with the MPPF and to a full weight.
Yes, that was agreed.
Right. Now, let's just turn up the core strategy, which the reference I've got is CD 5.06. And if we can turn in that document, please, to page 16 of the PDF.
Is that page 14 of the hard copy?
Indeed.
Thank you.
Here we have Chapter 2, Visions and Objectives, and the section explains that it takes the issues and challenges facing the district and describes the vision to guide objective setting and policy development, and it starts by reference to the North Somerset vision
Yep.
as set out in the Sustainable Community Strategy. And we can see reference to sustainable, inclusive, safe, healthy, prosperous communities thriving in a quality environment. And then at 2.3 there are 6 shared priorities, and we can see those including at the 4th bullet point down, improving health and well-being, and the last bullet point, living with environmental limits.
Yeah, I see that, yes.
Now, if we take those 6 shared priorities and we can see at 2.4, it says the role of the core strategy and other planning policy documents is to provide a spatial land use expression of these shared priorities. You see that?
I see that.
So when we're looking at the core strategy policies, to what extent do we need to bear in mind that they are the spatial land use expression of those shared priorities?
It's crucial. It specifically says that's what those, what the vision and then the 6 shared priorities produce. And then the core strategy is, as it says, it's a land use expression. So in terms of planning, you do have to take those into account. They're crucial.
Okay, so the core strategy has at CS23 a specific policy relating to Bristol Airport. You can see that on page 97 of the PDF. And that policy says proposals for the development of Bristol Airport will be required to demonstrate the satisfactory resolution of environmental issues, including the impact of growth on surrounding communities and surface access infrastructure. So, again, which group of people does this policy require us to focus on when considering impacts?
Well, again, it specifically says on surrounding communities. So it's those people who live around the airport.
Okay, now we've looked at the nature of the support for growth provided by the APF and MBU. To what extent does policy CS23 provide unconditional support for growth at Bristol Airport?
Again, it doesn't, because it says it's required to demonstrate. So the development proposals are required to demonstrate the satisfactory resolution of environmental issues. So it's not unconditional. It is conditional upon it demonstrating that those environmental issues, whether it's air quality, noise, climate change, those have been satisfactorily resolved.
And so, bearing that in mind, to what extent does CS23 provide for a simple balance of harm against benefit?
I don't think it is a question of balancing harm against benefit. It requires development. So the development that delivers growth, it requires it to deliver the growth and not compromise the environment. Not so that whether that's in terms of the growth on the surrounding communities, whether that's the physical or the human impact, it has to address those.
If we look at paragraph 3.296, which is a little bit further down the page in the explanatory text,
Yep.
under the heading how and where will the policy be delivered, 3.296 says development of the airport is led by its owners, whose responsibility it is to ensure that the environmental impacts of growth are addressed to the satisfaction of the council or other relevant decision maker. So on whom does the burden rest to demonstrate that the environmental issues are satisfactorily resolved.
The responsibility is on Bristol Airport Limited to do that.
Okay. And what's your view as to whether that policy objective has been achieved in the present case?
Well, from the evidence of the various experts so far, it hasn't demonstrated that there has been satisfactory resolution of the environmental issues.
All right, we'll come on to that in a little bit more detail now. Let's look at noise as a topic area and the policy relevant to that. We've already looked at the noise in the context of the APF and sharing the benefit. Let's just have a look at the MPPF next. We've got that in the core documents. The updated version is, I've forgotten what the core document number is. It's 5.8.1, I think.
1 second.
This is where I'm going to get confused because I'm still not up to speed with the new paragraph numbers, but I'll do my best. I think we need to go to 174, which is on page. Oh dear, I haven't written the page number down. Hang on.
Yeah. 174.
It is.
It's on page 51 of 79.
Thank you. Yes, it's actually page 50 of the PDF that we've got.
Oh, okay, sorry.
And we can see here, planning policies and decisions should contribute and enhance the natural and local environment by, and then we can see at E, preventing new and existing development from contributing to or being put at unacceptable risk from or being adversely affected by unacceptable levels of a number of things, including noise pollution. And it says development should, wherever possible, help to improve local environmental conditions. Now, we've also got, that's 174, we've also got at 185 on page 53, planning policies and decisions should also ensure that new development is appropriate for its location, taking into account the likely effects of pollution on health, living conditions and the natural environment, as well as the potential sensitivity of the site or the wider area to impacts that could arise. In doing so, they should mitigate and reduce to a minimum potential adverse impacts resulting from noise from new development and avoid noise giving rise to significant adverse impacts on health and quality of life. Now, to what extent do you see conflict arising with those policies?
Well, there is a clear conflict. Mr. Fumicelli's proof of evidence in various paragraphs, sort of 7.2 to 7.8, set out issues in terms of whether it was mitigating and reducing to a minimum the adverse impacts. It showed that Mr. Fumicelli's evidence showed that there was a significant number of people who would experience an adverse or a significant adverse noise level increase. So in that case, the proposed development is in conflict with that, and the impacts are to be avoided.
And in terms of the mitigation scheme on offer, that's obviously been the subject of discussion and, in fact, I think disagreement. To just so that we understand it, we saw in 185A the policy requirement to mitigate and reduce to a minimum potential adverse impacts resulting from noise on new development. what's your understanding of the approach that noise policy requires in terms of mitigation?
My understanding is that it requires it to be to take all reasonable, practicable mitigation for those who are experiencing noise. And I think the figure that Mr. Fumicelli was using, referring to, and it goes back to the MPSE on that, was the LOL, the lowest observable adverse effect level. So all practicable and reasonable steps on that. And then the noise mitigation scheme, I don't believe offers that to all the people.
All right, thank you. So in terms of the overall position, looking at the mitigation offer, to what extent does that conflict with national noise policy and the noise policy statement for England?
Well, there is a conflict because it doesn't reduce it to a minimum.
Thank you. Now, in terms of development plan policy and noise, sticking with the noise topic for the moment,
Okay.
we, I think, need to look at policy CS3. And my notes have let me down again with my referencing. But we've got that in the core strategy that we just had open, which is CD 5.6. And CS3 can be found on page 33 of that PDF. It says that development that on its own or cumulatively would result in air, water or other environmental pollution or harm to amenity, health or safety will only be permitted if the potential adverse effects will be mitigated to an acceptable level by other control regimes or by measures included in the proposals by the imposition of planning conditions or through a planning obligation. Now, to what extent is there compliance with that policy?
The key requirement is to be mitigated to an acceptable level. And Mr. Fumicelli's evidence was that the mitigation strategy proposed is not mitigating the harm, the noise effects, to an acceptable level.
And so, having reached that conclusion, to what extent is the proposed development according with or in breach of policy CS3 in relation to noise impacts?
It's sort of the same view as it is with the APF or previously policy CS23, that there is a breach. It's not achieving the requirements of that policy.
All right, let's move on to air quality and away from noise. Just want to start there with the APF, if I may. We were looking at that a few moments ago.
Yeah.
CD 6.01. This time we need to go in the document to page 65. And paragraph 3.48, the government explains our policy on air quality is to seek improved international standards to reduce emissions from aircraft and vehicles, to work with airports and local authorities as appropriate to improve air quality. And it goes on looking at various measures about vehicles and polluting vehicles. And if we look a bit further down the page, there's a reference at 351. Studies have shown that NOx emissions from aviation reduce rapidly beyond the immediate runway. Road traffic remains the main problem. Airports are large generators of surface transport journeys and as such share a responsibility to minimise the air quality impact of these operations. The government expects them to take this responsibility seriously and to work with the government, its agencies and local authorities to improve air quality. So if we bear those in mind, what is the policy objective that the APF identifies in terms of air quality?
Well, for both of those paragraphs, they finish with the words to improve air quality. So the objective is to improve air quality. And
if we go from there, please, into Aviation 2050, which is the CD 605, we turn in that document, please, to page 77.
Yep.
We have an explanation that the government expects airports to make the most of their regional influence to provide innovative solutions and incentives against ambitious targets which will reduce carbon and congestion and improve air quality. Again, what policy objective can we see in that paragraph of Aviation 2050?
Well, there's an expectation, and then the requirement is, what the mention is, innovative solutions and incentives against ambitious targets. The aim is then to reduce carbon. So the requirement on that, again, is a reduction, but it does mention innovative solutions and incentives to achieve that.
Yeah, well, it was put to Dr. Broomfield that this paragraph is about setting surface access mode share targets, and that was on the basis of the previous paragraphs about surface access strategies, and paragraph 3100, the reference to carbon emissions. If we read that paragraph 3.101, do you agree that it is not about setting innovative solutions and incentives to achieve improved air quality, or what?
Well, it is in the surface access section, but you have to look at it in the round as to what the Aviation 2050 and other policies like the APF are saying. So the answer is no. And you know, when we've looked at the APF and government policy, it is about improving air quality.
Okay, let's turn from the national context for air quality then, and on to the MPPF. We looked a few moments ago at paragraph 174E, which was on page 50 of the PDF, refers to unacceptable levels of...
Sorry, which paragraph?
174E refers to decisions contributing to and enhancing the natural and local environment by preventing new and existing development from contributing to, being put at unacceptable risk from, or being adversely affected by unacceptable levels of air pollution. And development should, wherever possible, help to improve local air environmental conditions such as air and water quality. The MPPF's got another paragraph that I just want to take you to before I ask you a question about the approach to adopt. Paragraph 186 refers to policies and decisions sustaining and contributing towards compliance with relevant limit values and national objectives, taking into account the presence of AQMAs and clean air zones, cumulative impacts from industrial sites. Opportunities to improve air quality or mitigate impacts should be identified, such as through traffic and travel management, green infrastructure provision and enhancement. Just looking at that, what attempt has there been in the design of this scheme from its outset to identify the opportunities available to achieve improvements in air quality?
I don't think there has been, because when you look at, if you go back to Wood's planning statement, they've got the Air Quality Action Plan, which is a late addition. They basically say it's to be secured through the Section 106 agreement. That's in paragraph 8C of their Appendix D, which is on page 124 of 190 of their planning statement. And then the addendum to the environmental statement in Chapter 9 had an update as well. And it looks like the scheme is to be included within the Section 106 agreement. It's a future thing. They haven't looked, to me, looking at it, they haven't looked at the opportunities up front to improve air quality or mitigate its impacts. It is something that they offer in the future that they will do, they will monitor and address.
Thank you. So as a result of that, to what extent do you consider there to be compliance with national planning policy?
Well, that appears to be contrary to what national policy says, that they should be looking at the opportunities to improve air quality as part of the development. That should be up front.
Now, air quality in the context of the development plan, let's just have a look at that. We looked earlier at the core strategy and
Right.
how it sought to reflect the North Somerset vision and how it included a shared priority of improving health and well-being. Remember that?
Yes.
So let's just, in that context, just think about the second reason for refusal, which cited policies CS3, 23 and 26. We've looked at CS3 and 23 already. How do those apply in the context of looking at the air quality issues in this appeal, please? Start at CS3 first.
The CS3 requires mitigation to an acceptable level. And from Dr. Broomfield's evidence and from the Air Quality Action Plan, that doesn't seem to have been addressed. It hasn't been considered. So in terms of achieving national policy and then compliance with the development plan, there would appear to be a conflict.
Right. CS3, we saw that required satisfactory resolution of environmental issues. And in the context of the objectives of national aviation policy to achieve improvement, to what extent is there compliance with
Did you mean
CS23?
CS23, sorry.
Yeah.
So yes, CS23 has then got the satisfactory resolution, as you've just said. Sorry, I heard you say CS3. So compliance with the objectives in the national aviation policy, there doesn't appear in terms to be, or there isn't an improvement in air quality. So that is not being realised. So if there isn't an improvement in air quality, so that would mean that with CS23, as with national aviation policy, there is a conflict. It doesn't result in a satisfactory resolution.
Okay, let's turn to CS26. Now, we haven't looked at that yet this morning. It's on page 102 of CD 5.6, full strategy. It's internal page 100.
Okay.
So 102 of the PDF, 100 of the paper copy.
Got it.
And we can see that this policy falls under the heading ensuring safe and healthy communities. It's got a subheading, CS26, supporting healthy living and the provision of healthcare facilities. The planning process will support programmes and strategies which increase and improve health services throughout the district, promoting healthier lifestyle and aim to reduce health inequalities. This will be achieved through, 1, requiring health impact assessments on all large-scale developments in the district that assess how the development will contribute to improving the health and well-being of the local population. So what is the objective of this policy?
It's to require health improvement. So the health impact assessment on all large-scale developments, of which the BAL proposal is a large-scale development, should assess how it will contribute to improving health and the well-being of the local population. So the objective is to improve, well, to identify the potential health benefits that could result from the development. It's to improve the health of people.
And so if it were concluded that a large-scale development resulted in a reduction in the health and well-being of the local population, to what extent would there be a breach of policy CS26?
Well, it would be contrary to policy CS26. It would be a breach. It's not, if it's not achieving the contribution to improving the health and the well-being of the local population, then that is contrary to what the policy requires.
And we can see that it refers to the health and well-being of the local population.
Yep.
In the context of large-scale development. Which group of people is being referred to when it refers to local population in the context of the large-scale development?
Well, as
Part 1.
As with the national policy that we've looked at, it's the community living around the airport, it's the local settlements, the local people in the area.
Now we heard evidence from Mr. Piper about his health impact assessment. You recall his evidence and the cross-examination?
Yes.
To what extent did Mr. Piper's assessment examine whether those living around the airport would experience health benefits?
His assessment was at a very high level. So it looked at the populations for the whole of North Somerset or the wider region. I think he accepted in cross-examination that it wasn't sufficiently fine-grained to look at the immediate local population.
And so in terms of his health impact assessment, to what extent has it been demonstrated that the expansion of Bristol Airport will contribute to improving the health and well-being of those living around the airport?
Well, it hasn't. It's looked at a much wider area. It's not considered the local area.
And so what conclusion do you draw, Mr. Gutler, in terms of whether it's been demonstrated that CS26 is complied with by the proposed development?
Well, given that the policy is a land use planning expression, it's seeking to achieve health benefits for the local population, then it's not being complied with. The proposal has not achieved that. It is in conflict with it.
Thank you. Now, I want to turn then, we had health as the second section, but we just addressed that, I think. in terms of surface access as a topic, let's turn to that next.
Yeah.
And for that, I would like to start, please, in Aviation 2050. And, sorry, I expertly turned to the MBU at that point. Page 76 of that document, please. That's 76 of the PDF. It's internal, page 74.
Okay. Yeah.
And there's a section headed Sustainable Journeys to the airport. And we can see that there's a reference to the government's ambition being to put the UK at the forefront of design and manufacture of zero-emission vehicles, investment in that arena, measures in the Road to Zero strategy published in 2018, and then at 399, the government's expectation is that airports, through their surface access strategies, set targets for sustainable passenger and staff travel to the airport, which meet, where possible, the ambitions set by government, and for these to be monitored by their respective airport transport forums. There's a reference to surface transport carbon emissions in the next paragraph, and then 3.101 that we saw earlier. What approach is being expected of proposed development by those paragraphs, Mr. Gertler?
So the first one you passed on or mentioned was in 3.99. So the first one is to, through the surface access strategies, to set targets for sustainable passenger and staff travel to the airport. And then it says that that's to meet the government's objectives. And then in 3.101, we've got the innovative solutions and incentives to be used against targets, reducing carbon and congestion, and improve air quality. So the aim is for them to set targets and then to provide solutions that address those ambitious targets.
Okay, thank you. Now, the MPPF next, please, to the next element of national policy context. Paragraph 104 of that document, and it's page 30 of the PDF.
Yep.
And we can see here that transport issues should be considered from the earliest stages of development proposals, so that, and then there's a number of elements set out, including the impact on networks being addressed, opportunities from existing or proposed transport infrastructure being realised, opportunities to promote walking, cycling and public transport are identified and pursued, and the impacts identified, assessed and taken into account, including appropriate opportunities for avoiding and mitigating any adverse impacts and for net environmental gains, and there's reference to pattern of movement. So at what stage of the design process for a development proposal is a developer being told here they have to identify the opportunities to promote public transport? And
the first sentence says it should be at the earliest stage of a development proposal.
Right. And what assessment have you seen which demonstrates that in this particular case, the expansion of Bristol Airport that's proposed here included an assessment at the earliest stage of development design of the opportunities to promote public transport?
Well, obviously there was a transport assessment submitted with the original application. There's been an update with the addendum ES. And then it seems to have been an iterative process with Mr. Collins' review raising issues, questioning whether the potential impacts have been adequately addressed, questioning whether the I think frequently in his proof of evidence it talks about the promoting walking, cycling and public transport, whether that's adequate. And then just looking at it, if you look at the public transport aspect, it seems to have come in originally with the 15% target, and then officers questioned that, and then there was a 17.5%, and then more recently with the CAA data, there's been questions about looking at an increase there using that data as the 21.8, and whether you can add 2.5% or more to that. So it doesn't seem to have been at the earliest possible, or definitely they haven't achieved the sort of directive there that it should look at the impacts, it should try to seek and identify and pursue those opportunities at the earliest stage. It has been ongoing.
If we turn on in the MPPF to paragraph 110, which is at the foot of the next page, page 31 of the PDF, that's under the heading Considering Development Proposals. In assessing specific applications for development, it should be ensured that appropriate opportunities to promote sustainable transport modes can be or have been taken up, given the type of development, its location, safe and suitable access can be achieved for all users, and then there's reference to street design, and any significant impacts from the development on the transport network or on highway safety can be cost effectively mitigated to an acceptable degree. To what extent is there compliance with that element of national policy?
Well, there's obviously, from my previous comment, there's obviously areas where there is a conflict. So if you were just to take the public transport, promoting sustainable transport modes, it doesn't look like the appropriate opportunities were taken up. There's still a debate as to what the level should be, so that there does appear to be still conflict with that policy in the MPPF.
Thank you. Let's move on from national policy and drill down to the development plan. So back to CD 5.06, page 24 this time, and this is policy CS1, which is set out under a heading Living Within Environmental Limits. And CS1 identifies that the Council is committed to reducing carbon emissions and tackling climate change, mitigating further impacts and supporting adaptation to its effects. To support this, the following principles will guide development. We can see in one, development should demonstrate a commitment to reducing carbon emissions, including reducing energy demand through good design. We can see a reference at 4 to opportunities for walking, cycling and the use of public transport to be maximised, and in existing areas emphasising the aim to provide opportunities that encourage and facilitate modal shift towards sustainable transport modes. So that's one element of the development plan. We've also got policy CS10, which we can find on page 57 of the PDF. Still in the chapter Living Within Environmental Limits, and that refers to travel management policies and development proposals that encourage an improved and integrated transport network and allow for a wide choice of modes of transport as a means of access to jobs, homes, services, facilities will be encouraged and supported. And it says that transport schemes should enhance facilities for pedestrians, including those who have reduced mobility and others such as cyclists, deliver better local bus, rail and rapid transit services, develop innovative and adaptable approaches to public transport in rural areas, improve road safety, and reduce the adverse environmental impacts of transport, mitigate against traffic congestion, improve connectivity and support movement of freight by rail. So in that context of CS1 and CS10, and indeed the national policy context we've looked at, to what extent has Bristol Airport Limited set itself, or proposing to set itself, an ambitious target?
It doesn't appear to have set an ambitious target. It does refer to it as being a stretch target, but it doesn't appear to be ambitious from the evidence that was discussed with Mr. Collis and Mr. Whitchalls.
And to what extent has the public transport mode share been maximised?
Again, it hasn't been maximised. It identifies quite a few areas that public transport could improve, could be increased. It gives the 2.5% when just choosing some of the areas that Mr. Whitchalls identified had 2.8%, but it goes beyond that, and Mr. Collis identified that it could be at least 5% more.
So what is the consequence of that then for compliance with the national planning policy context and policy CS1 and CS10?
Well, it doesn't comply. It's not ambitious. It's not maximised.
And if the public transport mode share has not been maximised, what is the consequence of that for the Greenbelt case?
The consequence is that there could be a greater demand for parking spaces, which then puts the pressure on the Greenbelt. So if public transport is maximised, then there could be less of a requirement for the parking to move in the Greenbelt, and then the harm that would occur to the Greenbelt.
Just at a convenient moment.
I was going to ask you to wrap it up after surface access. So yeah, we'll come back at 2 o'clock and kick off with climate change. Thank you.